webinar. I'm going to be talking this morning on why your website isn't converting and hopefully giving you some tips on how to fix that. Just before we make a start though, hopefully everyone can see my screen and hear me, but if there's any technical issues this morning, please drop a message in the chat. But otherwise for now, I'll assume everyone can hear and we'll make a little start. So a quick introduction to myself. My name is Will. I'm the Managing Director and founder of an agency called Webbox. We help our clients with building and maintaining their websites and running performance marketing campaigns. And I've been doing this for the last 16 years. So I've seen a lot of what works and what doesn't work digitally, and hopefully I can share some of that insight with you today. So that's really what's going to infuse the content. Now, just before we begin, a few little things. So we are going to be recording today's session. So I will be able to send you a copy of that recording shortly. We're also going to be kind of moving through this content fairly quickly. So kind of bear with me because I've got a fair amount to get through. But if you need to catch up, of course, you can look at the recording again. Or if you want to deep dive into a particular area of this talk, then please drop us a message afterwards. There is going to be a point where I'm going to ask for hands up. I'd love just for you to be involved in that. And obviously, because we're doing this digitally today, you can use the hands up feature within Zoom to do that. And finally, we always encourage feedback on our talks. So if there's anything you'd like to feedback to us, please do share it with me directly, or you can tag us on socials at Webbox Digital. So this talk is going to be split into kind of 4 areas. I want to start with looking at the foundations. When we're looking at CRO strategies, before we even get into those, we need to make sure that we've got our ducks in a row. So I'm going to start with the foundations. I'm then going to give you 10 possible reasons why your website isn't converting, and we're going to look at each of those 10 together. I then want to give you a to-do list. So you're going to have a little bit of homework today, and I'm going to give you some next steps and then also some resources towards the end. So without further ado, let's have a little look at the foundations to begin with. So this is really making sure that actually we're in the right place before we actually think about CRO. So let's start by thinking initially about why does this even matter, right? So getting people to your site is only half the battle, and I hope you kind of understand that and appreciate it. With rising ad costs and shorter attention spans, you've got to make the most of every visit. Now, CRO is about small strategic changes that can lead to big improvements in performance. It's not about guesswork or preferences, it's actually about data and insights. So that's really why it matters, and it really should be on the top of our agendas when we're thinking about anything like our website or any form of digital marketing. Now, also coupled with this, we need to understand user intent and behaviour, because not everyone comes to your site ready to take an action. Some are just browsing, some might be comparing, others might be ready to inquire or buy. But your site needs to serve all of those intentions, okay? Now, what we can do is use data tools to uncover where people are dropping off and, more importantly, understand the why, and then hopefully, after understanding that, remove the friction, okay? But just this point about user intent is really important, so I'm going to circle back to this a little bit later in the talk. The other part of the foundation is understanding the psychology behind conversion, because we all know conversion is often emotional. So visitors need clarity, confidence, and a sense of momentum. So if you're missing those trust signals, or your site just feels disjointed, then people will hesitate or bounce or leave the site. So there's a couple of things you can do to kind of work around that. Obviously using things like social proof, clarity of message, well-placed call to actions, and many others to kind of guide the journey. But let's not underestimate the psychology behind what it takes to get someone to convert. And then just the last part of this kind of foundational element is actually measuring what actually matters. So not all metrics are created equal. Don't just focus on bounce rate or time on page, because actually these kind of metrics can be read in several ways. So let me just give you an example. You might look at engagement rate, or the opposite of bounce rate. And if you're looking at that on a blog post versus a landing page versus your home page, actually you should be measuring these differently, because it's quite common to have a low engagement rate on a blog post. Because actually someone might just have seen that link on social, click on it, have a quick glance and then jump off. Whereas if that's the same for your homepage, clearly there's some fundamental issues that need to be resolved. So we need to understand the nuance between kind of what page they're navigating to. The other kind of aspect of this is, we look at time on site or time on page and we think, do you know what we need? What we need is people spending longer on our website. But actually, when we look under the hood and we look at the data behind that, sometimes it can just mean people can't find what they're looking for. And by improving the user journey, streamlining the navigation, they can actually just get to the content quicker and easier. And therefore, the time on the site is less. Now, that isn't a negative. Of course, that's a positive. So we need to just be careful about looking at these metrics and really understand them in the context in which they're meant. So yeah, look deeper, I think is the point I'm getting at. What we want to do is maybe look at key user journeys and ask ourselves, are people completing these key user journeys? And maybe we kind of hang our hat on a metric like that. People talk about kind of focusing on a North Star, don't they? I think it's really important when it comes to CRO to have a solid foundation, have your North Star as such, because I think this is really what is going to help you move the website forward over a period of time, because obviously this is not just a one-off piece of work, and that will create the impacts that you're looking for. Now that's the foundations, and I've whizzed through that. There's a lot of kind of stuff I could have gone into, but I really want to get to this part, which is the 10 reasons why your website isn't converting. Now, we all know that there's far more than 10, and we could speak about this topic for weeks, but I think it's important that we start with some low-hanging fruit that hopefully uses this kind of 80-20 rule, because actually the principle of fix the few that matter the most really is relevant when it comes to CRO, and especially the early stages of that. So let's get into these 10, and I'm going to start with the first one. One we see quite frequently. So an unclear message and value proposition. Now, if I asked you to say, what does this business do? I'm sure you probably wouldn't be sure. So that is the homepage of a business, and it is very difficult to understand what it is that they do without really delving into a number of pages. But if I actually kind of threw the baton over to you and said, could you tell me what your business does in just one sentence? Tell me your value proposition. It's actually quite difficult to do. I think often we can be critical of others, but actually when we kind of have to think about it for ourselves, we understand how difficult it is to craft a killer one-liner that sums up what we do in just a few words, because this needs to kind of reside on our homepage, ideally kind of within the hero section, so we haven't got a lot of space. So actually summing up what it is that you do in a succinct sentence is really important. Now, if we can't do that, often we've lost the user at that point, okay? Now, in my experience, clarity beats cleverness every day of the week. So making sure your value is obvious and front-loaded is really important. Now, by doing this, it will increase your engagement rate, because people are able to understand what you do, you're able to catch their attention very quickly, and then they should be kind of then navigating through your site. But of course, if they don't understand what you do very quickly, then they've either got to be really interested to then read lots more content to understand that, or they will just look elsewhere. I had an interesting conversation with someone recently, and we had a look at their site. And actually, I think often we can make this assumption that, our content might be quite complex, or our navigation is, but don't worry, our audience get it because they're in the sector. They're professionals. They know what they're looking for. But actually, if we're struggling to understand that and to navigate around your site, it's quite likely your target audience will as well. So I think we just need a bit of a sense check sometimes to understand actually whether our content is resonating with our audience or not. Now also, when we think about this, of course you want to lead with benefits rather than features. Features are quite pragmatic, and thinking about the psychology of conversion, you need them to be more emotive. So it needs to actually talk about the benefits of your service or solution, and actually kind of what pain points you're going to be able to address for that particular customer or user. Now moving on to number 2, I love this one. So design for you and not for them. So this is the point where I would love some hands up, please. So using the hands up feature within Zoom, can you pop your hands up if you involved external stakeholders and customers in your last website project? Okay, so let's just give a couple of seconds for hands to go up. Wow, surprisingly low. Okay, so I'm just working this out in a percentage way. This is around about 5% of the people we have on today's webinar involved external stakeholders and customers in your last website build. Okay, thank you very much for taking part in that. I appreciate you using the hands up feature. I think this kind of sums it up, doesn't it? Many sites are designed based on internal preferences or what might get the attention of our leadership team, or might get the sign off from our leadership team. But actually, if we're really honest and pragmatic about this, it's what your ICP, what your customer is looking for that actually really matters here. Okay. Now we always encourage to get them involved early in the process, often through workshops or surveys or something of that kind of ilk. Now, one of the ways that we've done that at Webbox is we can host workshops with various different stakeholder groups. So this might be your existing customers, this might be a group of your ideal customers, this might even be just people who have never heard of your business or organization before. And of course, then we tailor the questions based on who we're hosting the workshop with. But this is a really good point in a project to tease out what it is that they might be looking for when they land on your site. So we've uncovered some stuff which we might never have thought of without actually running these workshops. So I just really want to stress the importance of them, because of course we're not building a website just for our own vanity purposes, or we're not actually building it for ourselves either, really. We're building it for our customers and prospects, and they're the people who we should be involving in this process. Now, the third reason why your website might not be converting well is actually having weak or missing call to actions. Now, this sounds so simple, but you'd be surprised how many websites we look at and actually the call to action is not clear, or actually it just is not compelling. Okay, so I think first of all we need to understand the kind of emotive side behind a call to action, and actually what is going to drive action. Okay, because actually clear action, a clear benefit, will lead to more conversions. Now, at Webbox, we talk about having both primary and secondary call to actions on your website. So let me just explain what I mean by that. Your primary call to actions are probably what we're all thinking of. So this is like making an inquiry, a phone call being made, a sale, these kind of like bottom of the funnel kind of actions, as I call them. Okay, but the secondary call to actions are also important to keep your users engaged. So a secondary call to action might be something like download a document or join a webinar or event, access a white paper. And through these kind of different touch points, you can still get people to engage with you, you can still capture data. And that's why we call it a secondary call to action, because they're not quite ready to engage with you, but they're definitely, on the cusp of that. And it's really important then that you nurture those leads over time. So think about whether your call to actions are clear, obvious, have they got a really clear action or intent to them? And then also think about, have you got a nice balance between primary and secondary call to actions throughout your website? And if you've ticked those boxes, then the next thing for you to do is actually learn and evolve those call to actions based on data. So, does one kind of call to action resonate more than another? Or does the placement of that call to action increase or decrease the number of conversions that you're going to get? So these are things that you can start to play with once we've obviously got the kind of foundations of good call to actions throughout the site in place. Now, this is not a scientific test, but what you might want to do is kind of look away from your screen and then look back at your website and just ask yourself, what were your eyes drawn to? If your eyes were drawn to, important content or a call to action, then that's great. You're probably doing pretty well at the kind of UI side of things. On the flip side, if your eyes are not drawn to anything, or there's just so much going on your page that you're not sure what to look at, then they're the red flags to look out for, and hopefully that will then lead you on a journey of correcting that versus obviously your eyes being drawn to the right things. Okay, let's move on to the fourth reason why your site isn't converting, and this is overly complex forms. Now, we all know long forms are a barrier, and if a form feels like hard work, people will just abandon it. So our advice is to always ask people for what you need rather than kind of just what you want. And actually, if you need to ask for more information, let's say there's more than 5 to 8 fields, let's say, then I would start to break up the form into bite-sized steps, so a multi-step form, okay? Now, forms are one of those things where we all know that as a principle. I think every kind of marketer listening to this will go, well, of course, this is really, really obvious. But actually, when we reflect on the forms that we use on our website, they might not actually kind of fall in line with this principle. So let's think about how we can simplify those forms. And I'm going to give you 2 ideas to actually how to do this in practice. So the first one is having a full screen form. And I'm going to name a brand, if you don't mind, Typeform. Typeform just lead the way, in my opinion, when it comes to form UI and UX. Okay, Typeform have these beautifully designed forms which are full screen. Often they just ask one question at a time, and they allow the user to navigate through using their keyboard. So you just pop in a response, click enter, and it goes on to the next question. And it's just a seamless user journey. But the key here is, because it's full screen, you don't get distracted. So you don't also see the navigation at the top and other bits of content on the page. The user is focused in on that page. And do you know what? Your conversion rate will increase because you have absolutely narrowed the focus of the user. Now, the second type of form, which is really kind of helpful to use, is what we call a progressive lead form. So this is where, let's use an example, a newsletter sign up. So this is where you kind of might say initially, if you want to sign up to our newsletter, give us your name and email address, because that's all we need to get you onto our mailing list. Now, when the user comes back to your website for the second time, we don't want to ask the same question again, because we know who they are. We know that they've already signed up to our newsletter. So at that point, we might say, hi, John, thanks for recently signing up to our newsletter. Could we also just grab your company name and job title as an example? And this kind of process can go on indefinitely. And you can keep capturing more data from your users to drip feed this content into your CRM. And this is one way to get around having this really long form, because up front, if you say, look, do you want to sign up to our newsletter or inquire or fill out an audit or whatever the form is, if you've got like 20 fields on that, it's just such a barrier. People just go, I'm not interested, thanks. Whereas if you could just kind of capture the absolute necessities up front and then change the form when they come back to the site, you will find that you'll be able to drip feed your CRM with more data over time, because it removes the barrier of that big upfront request. Now, moving on to number 5, this is having a poor mobile experience. Now, we all know on average, more than half of users to all websites access on their phone. So if your site isn't fast, clean, and tappable on mobile, then you're going to be losing conversions. It is as simple as that. So I want you to think about mobile first layouts and not just responsive design. Let me explain the difference. I think, when we talk about a responsive website, that is ultimately talking about the fact that a website responds to the size of the screen. So it goes, okay, I've detected this is a mobile, so I'm going to bring everything in and I'm going to stack the content in a particular way so that it looks okay on a mobile. Now that's great, but taking a mobile first approach takes this up to another layer. Because actually, if you can take a mobile first approach, what you do is you start to think about what the website looks like on a mobile before even considering it on a desktop. So rather than shoehorning desktop content into a mobile layout, it's the complete other way around. This will increase the user experience and conversion rate of your website across both devices, because it not only improves mobile conversion, but that kind of leads into desktop as well. Now, thinking about mobile layouts as well, you might need to ask yourself, do I need all of this content on a mobile device? Because when it all starts to scale down, you might find you end up with some really long pages. And actually at that point you go, okay, it's not a great experience for the users, or maybe it pushes your call to action so far down the page that no one's ever going to see it. So ask yourself, do I need to hide particular elements on mobile devices so that the experience is just right for mobile users? Or you might want to say, look, if I'm embedding iframes as an example, these can often be really cumbersome to use on a mobile. So do we need to either switch out that content for something else on a mobile, or do we just need to hide it altogether? But this is something you need to ask yourself, because actually having a poor mobile user experience will lead to a drop in conversion. Now, if you think to yourself, this doesn't apply to me because, maybe you're kind of a B2B business and the majority of your users are on a desktop, just let me remind you that Google is a mobile first index. So actually, regardless of whether your users are primarily using mobile or desktop, if you want to rank well within Google, it is important that you take a mobile first approach, because Google will look at your mobile UX, page speed, navigation, so on and so forth, to build up a picture of what it is that you do and then to determine how they're going to rank you. So regardless of whether the majority of your users are on mobile or desktop, please understand from Google's perspective, this is a really important point. Moving on to number 6, and this is having a confusing navigation or site structure. Now, again, we see this time and time again. I think over time, as we add more content to our websites, the navigations become busier, the user journeys start to get a little bit muddy, they're not as clear as maybe they first were. And at that point, we've really got to go back to the drawing board and understand how we can turn the tide, because actually this is a real blocker from a conversion perspective, okay? Now you might think, I've looked at my own website and I think it's really simple to navigate. And I would just challenge that by saying you should think it's simple to navigate because you've navigated it a lot of times. So you might want some fresh eyes or a fresh perspective, and actually sit someone down in front of the website and say, can you find a particular piece of content? And just watch them navigate through to actually find that content. Or better still, you could use tools like Hotjar to kind of record this in real time. And doing that will probably bring to the surface the fact that the navigation isn't as streamlined as you think it is. Now, navigation is one of these underestimated topics. People think it's really simple to build a good navigation on a website, and it just isn't. So getting navigation right is actually quite difficult. So I just want to give you 3 areas to think about when looking at your navigation. The first is think about the layout. So there's lots of different layout choices when it comes to navigation. You might just have a kind of more traditional header navigation where the links are just across the top. You might have a more kind of modern approach where everything is within that kind of hamburger icon and it reveals a full page navigation. You might have a tandem, like a hybrid of those two, where some links are shown and others are revealed in a flyout menu. You might have 2 navigations within your header. You might have some kind of small links in the top right to some key pages. You might have some navigation in your footer. So you can start to see there's lots of options here, and we need to understand what layout is right for you and your customers. The second is hierarchy. I'm sure we've all been in a position where someone comes into your office and they say, can you add this to the website? It's really important. It must go on the top navigation. And this happens over time until the top navigation gets so busy you can't find anything. We've got to be strict on ourselves to actually say, does this need to go into my primary navigation? Because if it doesn't, let's put it elsewhere to make sure that our primary navigation remains clean and clear for our users. And then the final aspect is content. So think about the language in which you use for navigation, because if you've got lots of like buzzwords or technical terms or product names that people might not relate to, that again could be a barrier to entry, because if they can't relate to those words, the actual terminology, then again it just acts as a blocker for the user experience. Now, if you are a service-based business on this webinar today, then just a little top tip for you guys. So often with a service-based business, you will list out the services that your business offers. And of course, that's a good thing to do. I wouldn't necessarily say stop doing that, but there is something which you should be doing in addition to that. And that is thinking about the challenges or solutions that you can also provide. So let me just use Webbox as an example. If on our site we just talked about the services, then we'd be talking about website UX, website development, website maintenance, performance marketing, digital marketing, so on. Now, you might be able to relate to those and you might know what you're looking for, but actually it's far quicker and easier for all users to understand a challenge that we can solve. So the one on the screen, we've got a lack of user engagement. People get that they can consume that, digest it and understand it far quicker than looking through a list of services to understand actually which service do they need. Because as part of a lack of user engagement, there might be a number of things that we need to look at. We might need to audit a PPC campaign because the targeting isn't right. We might need to look at the website's experience from a design perspective, or there might be some technical things that are wrong with the site. The service, is something where I guess we can talk about that at a later stage, but it's the challenge or the solution which I think will get people's interest. So just, if you're a service-based business, just think about listing solutions or challenges on your site to allow people to engage with you far quicker. Now, number 7 is actually having poor quality traffic. So, we can't convert people who were never a good fit in the first place, okay? So, you might have a PPC campaign running in the background, driving all this traffic through to the website. But actually, if they're not your target audience, then of course they're not going to convert, okay? So it's really important that we align your marketing, your messaging, targeting, your landing pages and everything in the middle to attract the right audience and to resonate with the message that they're looking for. Now, a little red flag here. If you're relying on like what I would call vanity metrics on your monthly reports to kind of the person you report to internally, that's going to be where you're actually getting a poor level of traffic. So let me explain. If you're really relying internally on, look how many clicks we generated, and look at our click-through rate, and wow, our ad was seen by 1 million people last month. These are helpful, but the context can actually mean that they're unhelpful. So these metrics are often what I call vanity metrics. You know, it can be helpful to understand how many people have clicked on an ad or clicked through to your site or seen a particular creative. However, if that's not leading to engagement, whether that's through primary or secondary call to actions, then actually it is just for vanity purposes. So we then need to kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, so these people who are coming to our site, are they the right people? Because actually, based on that data, they're probably the wrong people, and we're not going to convert them because they're just not a good fit for us. So this is something which I think a lot of businesses struggle with, if we're really honest. It's actually just poor quality traffic coming through to the site. So actually to help kind of turn that around, it might mean that we need to kind of audit SEO campaigns, PPC campaigns, or we need to look at kind of GA4 reports or Looker Studio reports to really uncover whether these metrics are good in your particular context. Because of course, the context and the user's intent is what sways whether these numbers are good or not, okay? So a little takeaway is really start to review the targeting of your ads, or maybe your targeting of your SEO strategy or email strategy, however you're driving traffic through to your site, to actually ask yourself whether that is the right audience that you should be hitting. Now moving through to number 8, and this is a slow site. This is a real bugbear of mine, okay? So if we're really honest, we're not a patient bunch, are we, okay? We want everything now, okay? This instant gratification culture. So actually, if I'm on your website and it's taking like 4 seconds, 5 seconds to load, at that point, I'm thinking like, what's for lunch? Or like, should I go and grab a cup of tea? Like you've lost me. So I think it's really important that our sites are quick to load, because again, when they're not, especially on mobile, it just becomes a blocker, and it gives people that kind of feeling of uncertainty. Okay, so really want to kind of encourage you to make sure your sites are running quickly. Now, a little thing you can do is have a look at Google's page speed tool. So you can scan the QR codes just to head straight there now. You can put your URL into that, and Google will give you a score, and it will also give you recommendations on how to improve the score further. Now, it'll give you a score based on your mobile and also your desktop score. So obviously it's important to kind of look at both. But suffice to say, as you improve the mobile score, the desktop score will increase as well, kind of naturally. Now, you want to be aiming for at least 90% in that kind of tool. So if your site isn't 90% or higher, then obviously you've got some work to do. But the good news is that it's actually not a significant amount of work to turn it around. So maybe at the moment you've just popped your site through the tool and it's coming back 50, 60% or something like that. So yeah, work to do. However, it's not a huge amount of work to turn that around to get it to 90% or higher. Now, number 9 is having intrusive pop-ups. And if we're really honest, this is a little bit like Marmite, because you will either love them or you will hate them. But in my experience, more people hate them than love them. So we've all experienced this. You're on a site, and within 1 second of being on the site, there's a pop-up in your face. And then straight away, maybe 10 seconds later, there's another pop-up. And you might navigate to another page and there's another pop-up. And you just think, gosh, give me a break. I just want to read the content on the site. But actually, if you kind of, move that to a side for a moment, If you actually have the timing right, and you trigger pop-ups in the right way based on maybe an action or an event being triggered, then actually they can really add value to the experience. But you really have to be careful with how you use them. So I'm not an advocate for never using a pop-up, but I think you've got to be really careful about when to use them, because actually if you're just throwing them up randomly or just after a couple of seconds of people being on the site, it is just really, really frustrating. And if you're anything like me, you'll probably just navigate away out of principle because it's just really frustrating. Now, the only caveat to that will be for your cookies pop-up. Now, of course, a cookies pop-up is a legal requirement, so we can't get around that. But just whilst we're talking about cookies, we've seen most websites having this cookies banner across the bottom of their website. And what happens is a lot of people either ignore it or maybe just don't see it. And by default then, that means they haven't accepted or declined. So actually it's declined because they haven't clicked accept. So that means then we can't track them. So if you're struggling with the amount of people who are maybe coming to your site but not accepting cookies, then our advice is to move that cookies pop-up to the center of the screen, grey out the perimeter, so that when someone lands on your site, they have to make a decision as to whether they're going to accept or decline cookies before navigating around. That might feel intrusive, but I think people have come to a point where they accept cookies are just a thing, like, it's just part of, browsing around a website, and therefore it's not like this big barrier. And you know what? Even if people click decline, it's not the end of the world because they've made a decision, and that is better than just your cookies banner being completely ignored. But by doing this, you will find naturally that more people click accept because actually they might just have missed it when it's at the bottom of your site. So just a little tip there, definitely might be worth looking at the placement of your cookies banner. Okay, moving on to number 10. This is our last point of this talk. And this is all about rigid technology. So what we're talking about today is obviously how can we turn a website that doesn't convert into a website that does convert. And of course, for all of this to be possible, so for all of the kind of previous 9 points and for all of the foundations that I've talked about to be possible, you have to use a CMS that allows you to learn from data and evolve very quickly, because this is an iterative process, okay? So if every time we analyze data and we make some recommendations, you have to go back to an agency to make really simple changes, that's going to be a problem, because this isn't a one-off exercise. This should be something which repeats, potentially month in, month out, or quarter by quarter. This is something which should be happening regularly. So actually, if you can't go into your CMS, change the content, specifically things like headings, metadata, content, imagery, so on, then that's going to be a big blocker to you actually rolling this out quickly. Or if you can't change the layout. So you might be kind of learning that your call to action blocks are just too far down the page. Well, if you can't drag that block up further, then again, that's going to be a problem, okay? Because you're going to just have a lot of costs by going back and forth to an agency to just make these simple changes. So having the right technology stack in place is going to allow you to iterate based on data far quicker and easier than actually kind of relying on a developer for each single change. It also means you're going to start from scratch every time, because you can just kind of go into your CMS, make some simple changes, and then start to gather data again. So big believer in choosing the right CMS. Now, if you're in that kind of stage at the moment and you're thinking about what CMS should I be using for our new website, then again, we've got a guide that you can download here. It just compares some of the kind of leading CMSs. It just gives you a pros and cons list. So if you want to access that document, please feel free to do so. Now, let's just think about next steps, because I did mention at the start I was going to leave you with some homework. So here's your kind of to-do list for the next couple of weeks. So the first thing is, test with purpose, right? So we know that testing is powerful, but it's only powerful when you're doing that with intent. So let me just explain. If you start to put lots of tracking on your site and you start to use tools like Clarity or Hotjar and all these other things which are on the market, but you haven't got a strategy behind that, then really you're just going to be kind of blown around in the wind, because you're going to look at a stat and you're going to go, oh, that's interesting, let's kind of have a look at that, or oh, that's just caught my attention, let's look at that. And that isn't the most strategic way to do this. So actually what we need to do is start to use insights from that data to form a hypothesis, to then kind of test one thing at a time, and then to measure the impact of that change. So we need a bit more of a strategic approach to this so that your time is used as effectively as it possibly can be. And also start thinking about the kind of high impact areas first. So I've put here on screen things like your call to actions and your layouts and headlines and so on. Some people get really granular really quickly and they start to think about kind of a particular word that's being used. Let's start with the stuff which is going to move the needle. So, is my call to action resonating? Because if it's not, then what could we do to change that? Because that will actually give you more instant gratification in terms of actually understanding whether you're moving the needle or not, versus some of the things which will come later in the journey, which are far more particular. And then once you've got this kind of strategy, then you start to work through your action plan. So here's some things that I'd love you to do, and ideally in this order. So revisit your ICP. So who is it that you're targeting? So your ideal customer profile, this is. Who is it that you're targeting? What's their intent? Why are they visiting your site in the first place? Ask yourself those questions and have some really clear answers to them. Step 2, audit against these 10 things that I've mentioned today. Now, I said at the start, these 10 are just a starting point. Okay, there's so many other kind of issues that you could take a look at, but maybe just as a starting point, audit against these 10 points to see whether your website is falling foul of them. Start to then prioritize based on the kind of impact or effort. So if something potentially is going to take you months and months to kind of overcome or to work through, then maybe that needs to kind of go down in the priority list and maybe think about kind of stuff which you could work on and create more of a quicker impact. So look at your low-hanging fruit in essence. Number 4, if you are in the position of having a new site being built, making sure that you've got the right tools and CMS in place. Okay, it's really important. So think about, have I got a CMS that's flexible, scalable, and allows me to adjust the content? And if so, then that's going to be the right way forward for you. And then number 5, having this roadmap. Okay, so I've talked about the fact today that this is not a one-off process. This is something which will evolve and grow over time. So you want to build out a roadmap of things that you want to address on your site over a period of time, and keep adding to that roadmap, because this is a continuous journey. Okay. Now, just moving towards the end, so, how can Webbox help? Well, there's a couple of ways, if you're looking for someone to help you with this stuff, that we could lend a hand. The first thing is actually requesting a CRO audit. This is where, one of our team would actually look at your website specifically through the lens of what I've talked about today, and actually think about kind of where those conversion blockers might be. And we will then do that as a manual process. This is not like an automated tool. Okay, so one of our team here, specialist in this area, will kind of audit your site, and then we'll arrange a playback call where we will play back our recommendations to you. So if you'd like to apply for a free CRO audit, then you can do so via that link using the QR code, and I'll also send a link later on. Goes without saying, we're a Hotjar partner here, so part of that process would be to use Hotjar to kind of uncover insights to improve the performance of your site. Now, the second way we can help is we've got a ton of resources which we'd love you to access. So some of the kind of titles you can see on screen there but they might be relevant to some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment. So if they're relevant, again, I'll send you a link later on, and you can access any of our resources at any time. And then finally, we've got a ton of webinars coming soon. So they're going to be launched on our Eventbrite page very soon. These are some of the titles that we're going to be talking on. So for now, if you want to scan that QR code, it'll take you to our Eventbrite page. And if you just give us a follow on Eventbrite, what will happen then is you'll get a notification from Eventbrite when we actually release these topics in the next couple of weeks. So this is just a little teaser so you know what is coming up. And we'd love to notify you about these topics when they get released. So please do follow us on Eventbrite. But for now, I just want to say a massive thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this talk. I hope you have found it useful and there's some kind of ideas that have sparked your interest and some things that you can take away to implement now. But if you've got any questions afterwards, please feel free to drop me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to further the conversation. But for now, I just want to say a massive thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.